hello everyone, and thank you for coming, whether you're here in the room or you're online. Thank you very much for coming on this beautiful warm day in London and giving up your time for this BCS London Branches event. The London branches that I'm referring to are London South, Central and North. So we have a huge span of territory and we reach up to 10,000 BCS members. So where are they? Well, they're probably on holiday. I hope so anyway. But we run some great events and we run them rather more frequently than the half dozen events per year, which most of the 100+ BCS groups manage to do. We're tending to run roughly one per week. So we had one last week, and now we have one right now today. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're going to enjoy it. Now, I would like to know from everybody in the room, why are you here? And people are concocting all sorts of weird and wonderful answers to tease me, but I shall look at them all afterwards and try and work it out from there. Certainly, I know why I'm here, and here's part of the answer. So, am I a refugee from the US who got fed up with politics? Maybe. Am I, in fact, somebody who is a pen tester but seems to have lost his pen? Am I particularly interested in some aspects of IT? Well, the answer is, of course, the last one of them. I am interested in aspects of IT. In fact, I'm in a very fortunate position of being the chairman of those 3 groups that I mentioned to you. And I'm also really thrilled to have a number of my colleagues here with me as well to help with this event and helping you to enjoy the event. In a minute, I'll introduce you to the 2 ladies sitting here. But firstly, let me just tell you about my reasons for being here. I am interested in pen testing, looking into organizations, finding the weak spots, identifying where they are, how to cure them, and so on. Root cause analysis and all that sort of stuff. That's to do with the data, in my view, or it could be to do with the apps in the layer below, or, as we used to call them, programs, or it could be to do with the infrastructure, it could be to do with the hardware, it could be to do with the networks. There are all sorts of problems in today's world which are to do with IT and the different manifestations of it. But a whole lot of it comes back to data. So why am I here today? I really want to hear something about data and data analysis from a leading expert in that field. Who is the leading expert in that field? Well, this is where it gets confusing because there are 2 people here who are both experts in that field. But the one I'm going to introduce you to is not the name you see on screen, but to my great colleague, Dr. Kitty Hung, who is a business analysis expert. So Kitty, you are the interviewer for this session. Would you please tell us a teeny bit about yourself? And you can see a whole lot more of Kitty's speciality on the 7th of September. Tell us a little bit about you and then tell us about your guest.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. A little bit about myself. My name is Kitty Hung. I've been in the IT industry for 27 years, and I'm a through and through business analyst. After my PhD in 1999, I worked in academic for 4 years, and then I went to the industry. And firstly, I spent a couple of years in private sector, and I joined the central government in the Met Police for 15 years. And then in 2017, I went back to the private sector, and I work in Capita, in a smart meter program. And then I moved to Raytheon, which is quite a big defense contractor. In 2021, I joined Atkins, and I'm currently the principal consultant in Atkins, providing business analysis service. And I have just been tasked to head up the generative AI task force for business analysts. So enough about me. So tonight, I'm going to introduce you to our speaker. It is my great honor to have a fireside chat with Lydia this evening. So Lydia is an inspirational leader and a role model in the technology industry. She brings nearly 2 decades of experience driving innovation at top global companies. Lydia spent over 4 years in Facebook, and now it's called Meta, spearheading analytics projects and honing her data science skills. She went on to leverage her tech expertise at renowned firms like Citibank and GHG. Lydia currently heads up the analytics at Stuart, while she institutes a cutting-edge data practices. Her previous roles including senior positions with multinational Fortune 500 companies such as Ocado. In addition to her impressive professional accomplishments, Lydia holds a first-class honors degree in mathematics from the world-renowned University of Oxford. Throughout her career, Lydia has been a passionate advocate for women's advancement and leadership in STEM fields. She devotes time to mentoring young talent, especially female students considering technology careers. I would like to add a point that this is Lydia's charity. She is currently the director for STEMless, which is to encourage young female to enter the IT industry STEM discipline. So she got some cards, and you can have a copy after this event. So Lydia is a truly inspirational role model. Her academic achievements combined with her meteoric rise to success in tech sector make her story resonate. She exemplifies how girls interested in mathematics and science can forge rewarding careers that create business and social impact. It is my privilege to have Lydia share her experience and wisdom with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Lydia Monnington.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely and an honor to speak to you all today. I'll kind of take you through kind of a few slides on my career, what I do outside of work, volunteering, if you've got data skills, how you can use them for good. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of my top skills I found useful in my career, and also some challenges I've faced and what I've done to overcome them. And at the end, we'll have more Q&A with me and Kitty, and any questions you have both in the room and online. So firstly, my story, which Kitty kind of covered very well. But yeah, I'll talk you through briefly the stage of my career, and then if anyone wants to know any more details about those that I don't cover, feel free to ask at the end. So yeah, I did maths at Oxford. I actually really enjoyed it. Pure maths is my favourite thing, which a lot of people would find really scary, but I found it really interesting. And the other thing I really enjoyed was getting involved in like extracurriculars. So I was involved in a few societies. I ran a conference. I've still got a mug which has Women in Science and a picture of me in a lab coat on it, which is really good. So after that, I joined Citigroup, who are an investment bank, and I joined as a high yield credit analyst. You don't actually need to know what any of those words mean unless you're in banking. But basically what we were doing was building models of companies to understand which ones our customers, so investors, should invest in. I found it really interesting in a number of ways. The first, which I found continually useful, is like learning about finance. Like I know how to read a balance sheet. I know how to read an income statement. I know how to read a bond issuance, which is stuff that just tends to be kind of useful in general. So I found that really good. And the second thing I found really useful was learning just to understand different companies' business models. At the time, I was the junior person. I was reporting into 2 more senior. So we looked after 70 companies total across different industries. And so I now know like how shipping companies make money, but also how motorway service stations make money, which itself is really interesting. And like built models for all of those, which was really, really amazing. I realized after a while that what I loved was the building models and the understanding and the data, but not so much the markets. And so I looked around for a data analysis job or something that would allow me to use those skills. And I got a really great role at Ocado. So Ocado at that point was smaller than it is now. And I joined what was called the general merchandise division. So that is everything that Ocado sells that's not food. So toys, kitchenware, beauty products, all those things. And the really nice thing about being in that team was that we were a smaller part of Ocado. When I joined, it was only about 30 people total. When I left, it was about 100. And it meant that me and then my team was doing like all the analysis for like that part of the business. So we're doing things like pricing, we're doing things like merchandising, but also things like supply chain and managing the warehouse. So really getting involved in all the different pieces of the business. There's a few projects I'm really proud of from my time there. The first was thinking about returns. So, you know, if you think about Ocado, you've got some bananas, they're kind of brown. You're not going to send them back to Ocado because Ocado doesn't want them back. But if you brought like, you know, £100 set of pans, we probably want those back because we could sell them to someone else as long as the box isn't damaged, or, you know, we can send it back to the supplier. And so we actually didn't have a process at all. So one of the things I did while I was there was set up that whole process, you know, designing it, working with the external returns, you know, so delivery company, working with our couriers, so our staff in the warehouse to set up a process at their end, and working with the call center to make sure everything worked together. Another project I worked on is shorts. And so you probably don't know what this is, but it's actually the most irritating thing. If you place an online order with, say, Ocado or Sainsbury's, and they tell you you're going to get everything, and then you don't get something, that's a short. And it's the worst experience, because, you know, if you know it's not coming, you can go to the supermarket and buy it or whatever, but if you expect it to come and it just doesn't turn up, that's a really frustrating experience. And so one of the projects I worked was looking into all the data. Why did every short happen? Can we work out the cause? And then actually working out what we need to change to make that, you know, reduce that. Managed to reduce them about 80% by finding different root causes and working with different teams. So one was a fix we had to get IT to fix. One was something we had to like change with the warehouse and stock levels, but, you know, working with different teams to get those implemented. And then my final favorite project as Ocado, because it, you know, it's a physical thing, is me and one of the members of my team designed a new warehouse. So general merchandise, for if you're a warehouse nerd, you can ask me in the drinks afterwards. General merchandise is a different warehouse to the food, or was at the time. And so we had one warehouse, which actually where we sat every day was just above it. But at that point we were running out of capacity and we needed a new one. So what we did was we worked out how big it should be, where it should be, how it should be laid out, all of that. And then that warehouse got built a couple of years after I left Ocado. So it's one of the ones I'm really proud of. After about 5 years at Ocado, I was looking for a new opportunity to learn something new. So I moved over to Facebook as a data scientist and then a data science manager. At Facebook, I was on 2 teams doing different things. The first was Workplace. So Workplace is Facebook's Slack competitor, kind of internal comms for companies. The thing I was doing there was thinking about how to make people successful when they're onboarding. So that is, you know, you sign up, you're the first person for your company, and how do we show you that you can use it for work and that it can be valuable for you? And what steps do we take you through? So doing all the analysis to understand that and what was in it. The way we were set up, or the way everyone seems to set up at Facebook, is that you have each team has a number of software engineers and data scientists and designers and product managers all working together to make the best decision for the product. The second team I worked on was a team called Catalog. It's kind of a back-end team, so it's a little bit hard to explain what we do, but one of the things we do was kind of, if you are selling something on Facebook, so either via marketplace or shops, which where small businesses can sell on Facebook, we're kind of thinking about what products do we show customers and how do we know which ones we should show you. So the first one is kind of like, how do we tell if something's high quality? So what ML do you want to put on there to identify quality? Of the photo, of the description, do you think they're scammers? And then the second part is like, how do we know which products are similar to the kind of work out which ones you would be interested in? That was kind of my 2 roles there. After, again, about 5 years at Facebook, I moved to GHGSat, where I was an analytics manager. GHGSat is actually a Canadian company, and what they do is they launch satellites to detect methane emissions. The reason methane is it's about 100 times more potent than CO2 in the atmosphere, and often it's leaking by mistake. So it's really actually a big way of reducing climate change, because finding these and, you know, even telling oil and gas companies it's coming, so that it's them being emitted so they can fix it, is a really big way to reduce climate change. And so I thought that was an incredibly exciting mission. So yeah, they have satellites, and I was brought in to launch the London team, the UK team, basically to build an ESG product. So if you're investing, you're thinking about, you want to invest in a company that's green, you want to know how much they're actually emitting. Most of these companies do report it, but maybe you don't completely trust them, or you want some independent verification. And you want some numbers that aren't just kind of estimates from actual data. So what we were doing was taking GHGSat satellite data, public satellite data, and also facility locations, and combining those together to try to estimate the emissions for particular companies. So say a BP or a Shell, based on that. Most recently, earlier this year, I joined Stuart as our head of analytics. Stuart is a delivery company. So they do last mile, what I'd call instant or immediate deliveries. So the obvious example of this is takeaway orders. So if you're ordering from Just Eat, a bunch of those orders are delivered by Stuart, but in Just Eat delivery, so you don't know it's us, because we only actually operate B2B. We also do a number of deliveries for instant grocery orders. So not the kind of next day ones, but if you've got like a Tesco Whoosh or a Ocado Zoom and you want it like in the next hour, a lot of those are also delivered by Stuart. And so that's what we do. And my role there is to drive data decision making on the UK team. So that is things like, how do we decide where to expand into new cities? Where do we think there's enough customers to be profitable? How much will that cost us? Do we estimate based on density and things like that? Where's the right place to go? And then also thinking about when we're looking at the operation, how do we decide, how to cut costs in the operation? How do we become as efficient as possible? And making sure those decisions are data-driven. Cool. So, enough about my CV. Some more interesting things. So as Kitty mentioned, I'm involved in 2 charities, the Stemettes and DataKind. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second. And then outside of work, during lockdown, I completely fell in love with cycling. So this is a photo from a recent trip to Belgium. And I also love board games and hiking. So the Stemettes is a charity. I'm a director of the Stemettes. So Stemettes is actually a non-profit and a charity, and I'm a director of the non-profit. But the goal of the Stemettes is to show that science, engineering, technology and maths are for girls, non-binary folk, and for everyone. So how do the Stemettes do that? We do it in a whole range of ways. The idea is to have like really light touch interventions. So we have a social media, we have a Zine where we have inspirational articles and talks and kind of education. We have a closed social network. Everyone who's in that has actually been phoned by a member of the team to check they are a teenager. We have impactful events. So we do 2 kind of main things we think about with these. One is panels. So almost like this sort of event where you have inspirational people. And one is hackathons to show like, these young women and non-binary people, like what can you actually do? You make an app, you make a website, you can actually be inspired about what you can practically do. And then the final thing we do is kind of longer cohorts, which actually take people through 6 months to a year, getting mentoring or doing a certificate, or the STEAM clubs where we send boxes of educational materials to schools and they kind of do an activity every week for 12 weeks. The Stemettes is 10 this year. And how do we do that? We work with young women and non-binary people who are aged 5 to 25. The reason that kind of age range is that's from when you're starting to think about and get your impression of careers and what you could be good at and what you couldn't. So starting there. And then, the second half of that is thinking about your GCSE choices, your A-level choices, your degree choice, and your first job. And so the aim is to kind of get people set up for success in their first role. And in the 10 years we've been working, we've worked with over 60,000 young women so far, and we run events all over the country. So if you're interested in getting involved in the Stemettes, I've got a couple of little pictures, I apologise. We're always looking for event hosts, people to fund a programme. BCS is actually a lovely funder of Stemettes events, and we've done a number of events here. If you're able to donate, that's amazing. And we're also always looking for volunteers, both to be in panels, things like that, and also for fundraising support and mentorship. Cool, so the second one is DataKind. And if any of you are data scientists, data analysts, this is the one for you, because this is kind of how you can use your data skills directly for good. Charity volunteering opportunities, it's like, this doesn't actually use my skills directly, it's kind of indirect. So DataKind's aim is to help charities use their data better. A lot of charities have some amount of data. Usually it's unstructured, usually they're not using it or getting insights from it. And so the way DataKind is set up is to try and make those successful. So the things they do is provide data support, just kind of giving charities advice, do data dives. So data dives are effectively weekends where a charity will have 5 or 6 different questions, and then 30 or 40 data scientists will come for the weekend, kindly gear up their weekend and answer a bunch of those questions for the charity. And then if they're inspired by that, then they often go on to Data Corp, which is 6 to 12-month project where you can get a real problem solved. And then the final thing they have is the Data Collective, which is all about getting a bunch of charity analysts and people who work for charities who do data work together so that they can share knowledge, share learnings. They do kind of regular training. I've been involved in DataKind for about 3 years now. I started off doing a data dive. I've actually done 2 of those. They are really, really fun because you get to work on a completely different question to your usual work and work with some amazing people and learn from them. So I still have some of the top pieces of code I learned from different people, the top things like that from those. I've also been involved in a Data Corps project, and currently I'm on the scoping committee, which is all about working out what projects should go to data dives and what questions we need to ask. Amazingly, which I didn't know until I made these slides, DataKind is also 10 years old and has worked with 83 charities on over 100 projects. So yeah, if you're interested in getting involved, you can again host an event. We're always looking for partners, and if you want to sign up as a DataKind volunteer, the link is there, and I can show it up again later. I'll give you a couple of seconds to write it down. If it's too small, it's datakind.org.uk/volunteer sign up with dashes in between. But you should be able to also find it from there. Oh. So skills. I'm going to talk about 3 skills which I found useful in my career. You might think I'm going to be talking about the things on the right here. These are all skills I've used or technologies I've used in my career, but actually they're not what I'm going to talk about. The reason is, if you're already in an analyst position and you're wanting to move up to senior analyst, the blockers is not usually technical. Sometimes it is, but in most roles it's not about the technology after a certain point. So what are my top 3 skills? The first is communicating effectively. This was one that I really got wrong early on in my career. People would say, "You're so smart." What I realized they meant after a little while is I do not have any idea what you're talking about. I used to get really into depth in something interesting, diving deep into the data or thinking of a really overly complex solution. And people would have no idea what I was talking about. But they were polite. They said, "You're smart," but then I had no idea what you're talking about. But it meant I didn't actually work it out for a little while. So my first one is about communication. So I'm going to give you a few do's and don'ts, and then I'll also talk a little bit about a really good communication framework, which I found really useful, that was taught to me by a colleague of mine. So if you're thinking about communicating something, especially to someone senior, the first thing is to focus on your takeaways. What are the things you actually want someone to take away? If you're creating anything, the key question is not, if they don't want to know the details, they just want to know what are the things you want them to take away. So think about first, if someone's walking out the room having spoken to you, what do you want them to know at the end? The second thing is, don't overcomplicate your slides. Try and have one idea or one concept per slide. Arguably this slide breaks that rule. But yeah, it's always there's often a temptation to put 6, a number of different charts or a number of different ideas, but actually breaking it down into fewer things is often really valuable. And then the final thing is, you do want to make sure your analysis is solid, but your presentation or your communication to non-technical people is not the time to do that. You want to do it with your peers, have a peer review process in your team, or some other way of checking your work, but making sure that's solid, but you don't need to put the details in the presentation. Cool. So the framework I found really useful is actually one that came from McKinsey, originally someone called Barbara Minto. I think that's actually just hidden by this bit here. But she was the person who trained all the consultants at McKinsey for a while. And this was a really big principle they used and a process they used to communicate to kind of CEOs, executives, to really get their results across. And I'll talk you through how it works, and I'll give you a really basic example. So the idea is if you've got someone busy, they don't want to, be waiting around to work out what your point is. You want to start, just tell them the results, tell them that your decision or your recommendation, that's what you do first. And then you want to support that with key insights. So, you maybe have your conclusion and you'll have your kind of reasons why you think that is true as your next few slides. And then finally, you'll have some additional slides which go into all the data analysis and evidence if people want to go there, but you don't have to. Most people, and this includes me, find this really backwards when you first start doing it, because you're used to telling the story, or even like if you're from a scientific background, you kind of go through your methods before you go with your results. But in a business context, this can be incredibly powerful. So I went through a really basic example, but I think it's quite nice. It also shows other features, but I won't go into those in detail. But let's say someone had asked you, very broad question, how do we increase profit for the company? And let's say in this fictitious example, my answer is that we should increase prices to increase profit. So why do I say that? There's 3 reasons. I think there's limited opportunity for us to increase volumes. There is potential for us to increase prices, and there isn't an opportunity to cut costs. The reason this layer is kind of like that is those are all, if you're thinking about profit, profit is volumes times prices minus cost. That's why I split it up into those 3. Why is there limited opportunity to increase volumes? We already sell to 90% of our customer base, and having looked at the market, there's no obvious new market that's adjacent that we could move into. I think there's potential to increase prices because our product quality is high and we're already cheaper than competitors. There is an opportunity to cut costs because our unit costs are below competitors already, and so probably we're already really efficient, and our fixed costs are low. And so if you're structuring that with slides, the way I talked through it would almost be a slide each. So you could have the top one and a slide for each of those 3, and then those would be headings to kind of go into the detail. But that's quite a nice way to structure it. There's a couple of other things in here called like BCS, which we can talk about later if anyone's interested. Cool. So second skill, ownership. Again, personal story. This is something I got a lot of feedback on in the first couple of years of my career. And at that point, I didn't understand what the feedback meant, and I was too shy to ask anyone. So I'm going to avoid that. If you're in that situation, I'm going to help you avoid that now. I'll help you think about it. So how do I think about ownership? Ownership effectively is being responsible for results. So, think about it from the perspective of like your largest shareholder or the CEO of the company. What would you and what should your team be doing to be as effective as possible and bring the most success for the company? So recommendations on how to take more ownership. There's 3 kind of things I think about. The first is if someone gives you a task, do you know why you're doing it? Not just like the immediate, like, oh, we need to put this on the website, or the immediate thing like that, but what is the actual goal for the company? Like, how does it map up to revenue for the company or profit for the company or anything like that, or what the company cares about? And then how will it be used? Like, what's this actually going to be used for? How's it going to work? The reason for this is when you're thinking about building it, you might have to make a decision, and it's much clearer to make that decision if you know exactly what you're trying to achieve and how it works. The second one is clarify. So be really clear on what's expected of you, what you need to deliver, so you can deliver successfully. Finally, deliver the work you promised, make sure you overcome any roadblocks, and ask for help if needed. So the key part here is like meeting your. The final thing is delivering business results. This again, if you're anything like me, you love exploring data, understanding relationships, understanding how things work, and you can get really into the data and exploring it and understanding things. But actually, generally, you want to deliver business results, not get into it. So there's kind of a process I think about for how to do this effectively. People think that almost all the work is in this analysis section in the center. You start off, you might say, okay, I expect to do 95% of my work doing actual analysis. But I'd say it's actually probably more like 50%. And there's a whole bunch of other things you need to be thinking about. There's kind of 2 things I put either side of the analysis. Is first, making sure you're solving the right problem. And secondly, that your results are actually landing and being used. So on that first piece, are you solving the right problem? And the way I think about how you just work that out and decide it is to explore, identify, and prioritize. So explore, the thing I would do is have a bunch of conversations with people. What are the things that they see as the biggest opportunities, the biggest challenges, what's keeping them up at night? Schedule a couple of half-an-hour conversations and really understand what's going on with the team. And then of those, you can create a really long list and think about which of these can we support or help with data? Like which can we answer with data? Is there something that can be sped up with data? Is there a question that needs answering or a decision that needs to be made using data? And then you've got a load of items, and then you think about prioritizing them. So as I'm sure you all know, thinking about how valuable will these be? Can you tie a value figure to them? And also how much work will it be? So you could get a sense of, is it a 1 week project or 1 month or 1 year? And scale and choose them appropriately. Once you've chosen the right projects, once you've got a provisional list, you can share them back with people to get their feedback to see if they agree and that's the right thing to do. Then you want to do your analysis. And then at the end, it's about making sure the impact actually happens. So communicate your results really clearly, focus on your recommendations, not technical details. And then if something doesn't happen, you really want to understand why and have those conversations of is there something missing? Was it not as useful as we thought? Is it not actually going to work? But that's really how I think about skills. So yeah, the 3 skills I recommend is communication, ownership, and delivering results. So talking about a couple of challenges, might get questions about other ones, but these are some things I've found difficult in my career and I wanted to improve. The first one is making silly mistakes. So my example here was I delivered an analysis to our head of department, who at that time was my boss's boss, and he immediately spotted that department revenue was higher than company revenue. So I'd made a really silly mistake. And so, what had gone wrong and how could I avoid that? So the first thing I should have done in retrospect, and what he was effectively doing, was checking against known outputs. We had a dashboard of company revenue, revenue even by department. Had I looked at that, I would have seen immediately that it was wrong. The second was checking intermediate steps. The thing that had gone wrong was a SQL mistake. For anyone who knows SQL, I was joining 2 tables. One of the tables was sales by week and had week ID, and one was the date and the week ID and every day. So every week had 7 rows. And when I joined them together, I didn't check and noticed that there were 7 times more rows than I should have had. So when you're, especially when you're doing SQL, you want to do the join and then do the group by afterwards, not together. And then again, as I said earlier, having someone review your work before sharing. The next step, if something happens like this to you, it's then rebuilding trust as well and making sure that relationship is still strong. The second one is getting results accepted. One of the things that can be really hard in a data analysis role is that people will ask you a question and actually be quite invested in what answer you give them. And so something that's happened to me a few times is someone will ask me how something's done. So in this example, was the new button better? And I'll do an analysis, come back a week later and say, no, it's fine. It didn't do anything, so it's probably not worth shipping. But they're actually quite invested in that result. They want to have the result they want. So they might ask, did you control for the weather? And then you have to redo the analysis or part of the analysis, and it takes you maybe another few days. And they say, no, you say, no, when I account for the weather, it still doesn't change. And because they're still invested in the result, they might ask you again and ask for a different change. And as you go through this loop, you feel less confident in your analysis. It's frustrating because you're redoing it and doesn't actually get anyone where they need to go. So the thing I'd recommend is anything where you think it's going to be contentious or you're not sure how to approach it, have a plan in place before you actually do any work and agree it. The more contentious it is, the more seriously you need to take that agreement. But that means you kind of reduce the risk of rework. So here, you might get the questions, you might have the plan. You would say, spend an hour or 2 creating a plan and say, this is my plan. I'm going to control for the weather and payday, but not competitor promotions. We don't have the data for that. But making sure people really understand and what the plan is. And the thing you're aiming for is that they're happy that this is a strong analysis, that they will take action on the results and they will use it. Yeah, so if they say that's a good plan, you can then do the analysis using the agreed plan. And when you come back with an answer maybe it's not what they were hoping for, you've already agreed the plan is solid, so you're less likely to have a back and forth iterative conversation. The final challenge for anyone who's been in an analytics role, this is probably the most difficult. In the teams I've worked in and been in, on average, like, at Facebook, there's one data scientist for every 8 to 12 engineers. In my current role, there's one analyst for every 20 people. So, we're supporting a large number of people with data, general day-to-day data requests, but it's actually not where the real value is. The value is answering like core business questions. So balancing that, workload is one of the hardest things in a data role. So, because it's such a common problem, because it's such a big issue, I've actually got 9 recommendations. So the first kind of column is prioritize. So knowing, it comes back to the things I was saying earlier about like knowing what the work will drive, knowing why you're doing it and why it's valuable is the key thing. So then you can think about how do these rank up against each other in terms of. The second one is like, if you get a request, a really good question you can ask is know how the results will be used. So you can say, okay, let's say this number comes out at 10%, what will we do and how will it be different if it comes out at 90% or whatever 2 numbers make sense for you. Because then if the answer's the same, they don't actually need an analysis. They've made the decision. It's more like, what is actually going to change or be different based on the data. And then the third is make all that visible to people. If you've got a list that's in your head or somewhere only you can see, people can't understand the trade-offs you're making and the prioritizations you're making. But if you publish that so people can see it and share it with you, you can get feedback from them. Have discussions. If there's disagreement, you can have those conversations. The second thing is helping people help themselves or self-serve data. So my experience is a lot of people you work with will be able to use tools like Tableau or other dashboarding tools, but also like the basics of SQL, especially if your data is reasonably clean, which obviously is a big ask, is very possible. But having those processes in place and having that training so people know how they can self-serve. The second one is setting up processes. So in one of my roles, we were running 3 to 4 experiments a week. And, I couldn't be involved in all of those. But what I did was I set up a process. So everyone had to follow these kind of 10 steps when running an experiment. And that was starting with, what is your hypothesis? What are you trying to achieve? Going through, when you first launch the experiment, are you getting balanced exposures? Are the number of people you expected to be exposed getting exposed, or is it 10 times higher or 10 times less high? That means then if there's a mistake, you can fix it on day 1 rather than day 14 or day 30 of running the experiment. And then when you get the results, how do you analyze them and how do you use the system to analyze them? That meant that we were identifying a lot of broken experiments earlier, but also it meant that I only had to be involved in the most complicated or unusual experiments. And so I was then only involved in 10% rather than every single one. The final one is something I really love is office hours. Basically, you can come in, you have an hour where people can come and ask you questions and chat, but it means a lot of questions people can ask. If they want to self-serve, it facilitates that and other processes. The final one is saying no. There's a few tools I love for this. Focus blocks, which hopefully everyone's already using. So you have blocks of 3 to 4 hours in your diary, maybe 2 or 3 a week, or more if you're not a manager, to just focus on deep work and like not get distracted, turn off all your notifications, do your big picture work in that time or your big picture thinking. If you're more senior, this can be when you do your strategic thinking as well. See if you can, find ways to get people most of what they need with much less work. What's the 80-20 solution? And then again, saying no. If you've done everything else, sometimes you just have to say no. One of the things I think is useful, which is a kind of framework someone gave me, was focusing on where you can add unique value and thinking about what can only you do. So yeah, challenges, overcoming silly mistakes, make sure you're sense checking, looking into intermediate outputs and peer reviewing, planning project approaches, so agree analysis approaches before starting work, and finally prioritizing high value work, prioritize, enable people to self-serve and say no. So thank you for listening to me, everyone. And I will do Q&A.
Yeah. So we'll take questions from the remote audience.
Do you here first?
Okay, yeah. So the floor is yours. So any questions, we can just ask Lydia.
Can I just start off by saying something, which is simply a repetition of something I've asked half of you before already. Why are you here? Please note down on your little card your reason for being here, what your area of interest is. And then let's go for it with questions. Yes.
I have a question, actually. Thanks. A lot of challenges and I like your movement of recommendations happening. I think certainly when you come here. My question is with regard to how you navigated your career, where you see yourself, let's say, long term. How you thought about those changes in companies and projects and so forth. There are so many different aspects you can think of in salary, reputation of the company. Is it more ML focused projects, more like analytics projects, manager positions, not like, yeah, how you make those decisions?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. So I'll do some general principles I think about, and then kind of maybe some specific changes. So the first one of the things that's kind of semi-intentional for me was the fact that both Facebook and Ocado, I spent about 5 years at, actually 4.5 at both. And the reason for that was the mix of depth, but not over specializing. So if you think about having a job in any company, you start off, you're new at the company, you're learning lots of new things, and then you kind of get more settled and you can actually deliver a lot of value and have impact. But at a certain point, you start becoming almost like too specialized to that company. So at Facebook, that would be like, you know, they have specific internal tools, but they don't use standard things like DBT because they have the Facebook internal equivalent. So I would know like the logic of the technology because Facebook has an internal equivalent, but I wouldn't actually know how to use it. And in any company, there's kind of examples both in technology and in process that is like that. So I kind of think about like, what's the point where like I maximize my learning and my value and like don't kind of jump immediately because you can develop one role, but like, I don't want to become almost typecast to that company. The second thing I think about is kind of, yeah, I guess also learning and growth and like where can I learn? Having some idea of what skill I want to learn in each company. In my current role, my big goal is I'm now part of the UK leadership team. I report into our general manager for the UK, so he's the person who manages all our P&L for the UK, and that's a new thing for me because it's part, you know, it's managing a team, but it's also managing like the strategy of the UK business is something to do with that. So yeah, different moves. Citigroup, it was, as I kind of said, it was about, you know, I didn't like the markets that much. I loved the analytics part, so making that move. Ocado, I'd been there a long time. And at that point, I was probably the 5th most tenured person in our 100-person team. And so it was like, there just wasn't that much more to learn. I think that's actually the big thing for me, actually, because Facebook, it was similar. I'd been in 2 roles. I considered trying a new role, but decided actually something new would be the right way to go.
This lady.
Hi, yeah, I'm asking this partly because we're grappling with it at my job, but how do you see, I mean, do you think that the rise in generative AI is going to change the role of data analysts? I mean, how much is that a concern for you?
I think that's a really interesting question and one we probably haven't finished answering yet. I think it might even make some of the like that division between, you know, soft skills and technical skills even more extreme because, you know, as ML tools get more advanced and easier to use, and as obviously generative AI, you say, write me the SQL or write me the code to do this, you know, that technical bar is hopefully lower, but then the, you know, making sure you're doing the right thing and making the right decisions is on higher. Yeah, so I think that's the big thing I'd think about.
This gentleman.
So my question is something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, and it's that it is really related to data analytics. I kind of want to know where you draw the line between data analytics tasks that is that can be looked at by an engineer and it is self-evident, and another section which is like, okay, we need to hire a specialist to take a look into this.
That's a really good question. I think some of it is just, the first question is like, do you want someone who's focusing on it full time? in terms of like, do you want to like have guaranteed capacity on that thing?
Yep, and someone who specializes in data analytics rather than an engineer who's just taking statistics, for
Yes.
example.
Yeah. So I think it's then like complexity of the questions you're asking, because if you're looking at, you know, a lot of engineers, you know, will look at kind of, you know, what's the uptime rate and, you know, basic graphs like that, and that's no problem. That's really sensible for engineers to own. But if you want to ask a question that is like a day or a week or a month of analysis, that's probably not something you want an engineer doing, both because they won't be as good at it and they won't be satisfied, and you probably won't get as clear an answer.
Sorry, you first, yeah.
You mentioned with the Stemettes, you work from 5 years old through to say 25 years old. Do you think that the sort of primary education through secondary education is laying a good foundation for that diversity in STEM, or in some ways is it getting more challenging?
So yeah, it's really interesting. Like the reason Anne-Marie, who's the founder of the Stemettes, set it up was actually realizing the percentage of women in STEM was actually going down, and that was like her kind of realization of like she needed to set this up. And what started for her. I think one of the things we found is obviously we go into schools quite a lot and run events there, but people do come and say either they've got a negative impression of STEM or they think it's not for them because they're female or for whatever reason. I know it is something like that is being thought of a lot more, and it's something that I'm not involved in, but other parts of charity are involved in having those conversations to like improve it a lot. But I think kind of, I'd say maybe on the journey, but not quite where we need to be yet.
And so it's better to start early.
Yeah.
You know, because they have the time to consider their education path, where they want to go, the choice of discipline when they go to university. So we have a next question from the remote audience, right?
Yeah, we've got a question from Pauline. How can finance professionals acquire data analytics and work with data analysts to help service managers deliver more efficient services within budget constraints?
I'm interested in what kind of finance professional they are, because like I don't know if they mean retail or investment banking.
Maybe bank, yeah.
Yeah, so I think
You
it's
have a banking background.
yeah. So when I was in banking, and I think to some extent this is still true. All the data we did was in Excel, and so I spent a lot of time typing numbers into Excel spreadsheets. So one of the challenges there is sometimes, and I think that's to some extent still true in banks from what I've heard from people I know. To some extent, you've got a problem from, you know, just a cultural standpoint and a company standpoint. So maybe the thing I think about is, what can you do that's a self-contained problem where you can solve it for where you are? So maybe like, if it was my old job, you know, one of the things I had to do was we got the same model in Excel every time and I was typing in the same numbers. You know, could I have done that model in Python? Could I have done it, you know, with 20 variations to show like, you know, the sensitivity analysis for different inputs for the model? You know, would that have been a really nice thing to output and then for the company? So yeah, so thinking about what you can do that's like small, self-contained, but can add value without needing the infrastructure and the rest of the company.
Oh, Lydia, I just spotted a young lady in the audience. I want to ask you a question. You mentioned about there's a drop in email to choose the STEM subject in university. You agree with me at the moment, the purport is still not very proportionate. For example, I use this young lady in the audience as an example. As a tech leader, STEM leader, how would you like to influence this young lady to swap her ready-to-wear to software?
I mean, so I think it's about, for me, it's thinking about like, what is it, you know, what is it that you enjoy actually? Because for me, it came out of like enjoyment more than anything else, like an interest. So like when I was a teenager, I set up my own website, did it, you know, in code from scratch, and then worked out how to, you know, do a database backend and make things work on that. So it's kind of, I think people think, and sometimes it's the way it's taught in schools, especially maths, because I love maths, but didn't enjoy it in school particularly. It's like finding what interests you. So, you know, can you follow like that interest? And is there, you know, how does it connect coming to things that interest you and you find exciting and that you can learn from, and like, seeing, is it something, do you like learning new things and building things? Can you, have you tried out like Lego robots and all of those? Just having all those things and trying things out can be really valuable.
So you make it more fun and interesting. So you have to give the young female students a message that STEM is not that boring. So you have to identify the fun part of it, and hopefully it will trigger their interest to enter the industry. And on the top of Lydia's comments, I also would like to supplement your comments. STEM is a very rewarding area. It's a very rewarding career. And also I found that we work in the tech industry, we get respect from users. So that is my biggest career accomplishment. When I see they grin, they smile in their face because we have contributed to the technology solution that will make the users their life a lot better. I mean, do you agree with me? So,
The thought I just had as you were saying that is like, you have the potential to build the future, and that can be really exciting.
Any more questions from the floor? Yeah, we got that question.
One, if you're just starting out your career, what would be the kind of technology skills that you would invest on? There are so many nowadays, and it seems too difficult to understand what really business and companies are looking for.
So if you're looking at an analytics role, to me, the most essential thing is SQL. The reason for that is if you're working with a data set over a certain size, you won't be able to like bring it into memory to use it with any other piece of software. And so if you know SQL really well, that's the key thing. The other things that usually come up in interviews are kind of thinking about analytical problems. So things like the Facebook interview, one of them is like, if you were building this product, how would you measure its success? And then one about like, how would you determine if they're successful, things like that. So that's the other one. If you're then like, once you've got SQL pretty down, and by that I mean, you can answer most questions, joins and the differences and group by and aggregation. Then something like Python I think is really valuable. Especially if you want more of an ML than a data, than an analytics role. And so starting to like use Python, use all the common libraries. And then actually, I'd say the next thing is then using it for something. And so someone I used to work with put up a really good thing of like, this is how you can set up your own data stack. So more, the first part would be if you're doing data engineering, but a way of like, okay, you get a free tier on AWS to write some data, you pull some data from a public source, you're showing you can do that, you write a ETL pipeline with DBT, and then you actually do a piece of analysis. So, learning the full stack and how things fit together can be really interesting as well. We can chat about that afterwards if you want the full list. But everywhere has a different stack, but it's like almost knowing how things fit together can be really valuable, and actually thinking, almost actually doing practical things. Obviously, there's still Kaggle where you want to do ML competitions and all that. Yeah, those are two things I'd say.
Question from the gentleman.
I'm not sure quite what I'm asking here, but I've just heard that Microsoft is going to include AI with Windows 11. How will that affect, or what would you need to update for system analysis there?
Yes, I think similar to the lady who asked the question over there, like, I think it should hopefully reduce, like, the key thing of choosing the right project and doing, making sure you're clear on the answers and what you're trying to achieve becomes even more important, because you almost have more levers to pull and more, time and potential to do things. That becomes even more important to do the right thing. And then it should, I hope, simplify things like data cleaning, prepping data, getting into the right format, working out like, the nuances of the code you need and getting that in hand, because should hopefully speed everyone up a lot.
Gentlemen.
So just from my personal experience, when I've got like technical skills, but the company that I've grown in, I'm quite ad hoc when it comes to project management. your last question was a nice segue into it. So, what advice would you give for kind of moving things that I've studied about project management and, that kind of structure, and to trying to influence those that you work with to follow a proper, activity node diagram, that kind of thing, and really get it structured in a project?
And what's the problem it's causing you by not being structured right now?
For me, it's people understanding what I'm doing. For example, I'm splitting one company into 2 entities. I got asked if I could do it by the end of the month, which was 2 weeks. It will take me till the end of the year, because we have a private cloud infrastructure. So it's the non-technical people not understanding all the different components that go into a project to understand what needs to be done, and also what they're putting their expectations, really managing expectations of the staff around you.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things I'd maybe recommend. The first is like education of everyone you're working with. Like, you don't want to go into full detail, but really understand, can you give them a sense of what is easy to do and what is hard to do, and why is it hard? Because actually, in the example you gave, it might be that if it takes till the end of the year, do they still want that? Had they been assuming it was a 2-week project and saying like, oh, maybe we just want to split these 2 companies, could make something else slightly easier. So there's an education piece of like, how do things fit together? Why is it hard? What are the whole, what's the list of things you have to change? And I don't know if your manager is technical, but if they are, that's something you can rope them in for as well. It sounds like not. And then the second is, you having really clearly, kind of coming back to what I was saying about prioritization and sharing your plans of like, this is my project plan, these are all the steps I plan to follow. And sharing that back, so almost having it as having a plan that you're sharing really clearly with people so they can see how you're using your time at different points. And also be confident that you are making progress. Just before you start, making sure they know this is a 4-month project. Don't expect it to be done tomorrow. And that expectation setting and decision making, I think, is really key.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, another question from the remote.
Yeah, we've got a question from Zaira. How would you recommend young people going to university learn more about data analytics? Is it best to have a mathematics background?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. So in my career, I found people in analytics roles come from 2 paths. One is something quite technical, so doing their last job is something analytical, something like that, or coding or something like that, or their previous job is consulting. So actually both skills are really valuable. So from a career perspective, something like maths does help for the stats and things like that, or something like computer science where you're used to coding. But actually, I've worked with people who have a whole load of skills. So like, one of my previous team had biology skills, and that was great because she knew a lot of stats in a really practical way. But also I've had people who have done history or philosophy or economics or anything that has more communication skills. So I think it's, if you already know you like maths and you find it interesting, then go for it. But I wouldn't do maths just to get an analytical job. You can do it, if you do any subject and do some analysis on the side or do projects on the side, I'd say that should be fine.
Okay, so to add up on that, that last answer, if let's say you're not coming up with a vision of becoming a data analytics specialist, but you have any other background as an engineer or pretty much anything else, up to what point is it advisable to learn data analytics? Like, is it basics or?
Oh, you mean like if you're in a different role?
Yeah.
It depends a lot on your company, I think. Like, to me, the first thing is just data literacy. Like, it sounds a little bit of a patronizing term, but like just knowing, if someone shows you a graph, can you understand everything that's in there and what you're trying to take away? Do you get everything that an analytics or data professional would get? Because I think that's the first thing, and like that detail is quite valuable. And then I think depending on your company, like knowing the basics of how to use whatever reporting tool you have can be quite valuable. Then you have to be like, oh, I want to look at sales every week by for maybe the area of the country I'm responsible for. I don't want to have to ask someone to do that. I can just spin it up. Can be really useful. And then also like, the basics of SQL I think is really useful if you're a software engineer.
Do you think that statistics is quite important with data analytics or data science? Because I think sometimes probably you have to do things like descriptive analysis and all those sensitivity analysis and all that. You might need a bit of background in statistics.
Yeah, so I would say it's actually really interesting because I did do a maths degree and we had some stats in there. And the very basics of what you learn, so like mean, standard deviation, variance, is what I use in my job. And I guess knowing what a normal distribution is and that sort of thing. But beyond that point, the stats you learn at university is so theoretical, it doesn't actually align with what I use in the job at all. So things like, you know, power and significance, which never come up or never in that way in a degree. So I've always had to learn it in the job afterwards. So it is something you need to know and it is something valuable, but it's not. It's kind of why I don't think degree level is necessarily right for it, but something, you know, you could use Khan Academy of one of those to brush up on the basics, and that's probably what you need. There are some roles where you're doing something, you know, if you're doing, there's some ways of doing experimentation when you can't actually do an experiment, and some of those do use more advanced statistical techniques. There are areas where having the in-depth is really valuable, but for the basics, you don't necessarily need it.
So I want to, Lydia, I want to ask you a futuristic question. I want to follow up the gentleman's question earlier about the future Windows 11 Copilot AI. As you see, we're not going to avoid generative AI. There will be more and more generative AI, more and more Copilot, and they can do many automation, including data analytics, data visualization, and data intelligence. So we are talking about in maybe the next 6 to 12 months, maximum 18 months. What I want to know is in your field, in the data analysis, data management, data analytics field, what is your recommendation or advice to the people working in data analytics field? What should they do and what should they do differently in the future when all these automation and Copilot basically emerge to life?
So I think my first is a little, I didn't say it before actually, but I should have done, is a little warning. Like right now, do not put any of your data into ChatGPT or similar, because they will then have it.
Machine learning.
Yes, because you are training the machine learning as well as, you know, using it. So if you are, you know, IT and any company, like checking that and making sure that people have the guidelines around that is really important. So with that caveat, I think right now it's starting to use those tools and understand how they can provide value for your company and help you operate more effectively and be, you know, in your role, be more successful. And then I think the next step is, as data leaders, there's a question of like, what problems could we not solve because they took too long or because we weren't able to with the data techniques we had, that what can we now solve? Like starting to think about that from a strategic perspective of what does this enable for the business, I think.
And do they have to upskill and reskill themselves? Because a lot of groundwork will probably be automated.
Yeah, so I think there's a question, one of the questions in my mind is, do you want to learn prompt engineering right now? And one argument is, yes, right now it's really valuable for, you know, getting what you want from those models. But the discussion I've heard is that, you know, and the idea is like, as they become more developed, it shouldn't matter so much how you're prompting them to get the consistency of results. So I think in that sense, probably not.
It's more like an interim.
It's like an interim stage, potentially. Obviously, we don't know what the future holds. But that's one of the really interesting questions.
Recently, using ChatGPT, I ran a small workshop and we did an Android app right from the scratch to finished product in 3 hours.
Wow. These people who have these.
And we had another group that I knew of. They actually built a computer in less than 3 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
completely. So my question to you in that case actually is following up on these two questions, that how much your own experience has led you to use AI? Do you use it regularly from starting at Oxford Maths to today? How have you progressed into accommodating all sorts of algorithmic things in getting the result that you want? And AI is now the biggest one to do. And so if you run your experience with.
Yeah, so I think I first kind of really thought about algorithms when I was at Ocado. So Ocado has a data science team who thought about like solving specific business problems that were really amenable to machine learning or data science. So the problems they solved with it were the routing, so effectively which van does which delivery. You've got 3 constraints there, which is weight, volume, and time. How do you optimize that? Obviously, it's the traveling salesman's problem, so it's not something you can solve numerically. You have to solve it by approximation. So that was one of the big challenges they worked on. The second one was the warehouse. At the time, it was designed in such a way that there were aisles, and the boxes went down the aisles. And you had to decide both how close were the items to where the person was standing to pick them. So it's kind of, they had 2 meters range, but you want them to spend most of the time doing the things nearest them, but also which products should be near each other. So it has the limited number of stops and reduces the number of stops and the number of aisles it goes down. There's a few problems there, which Ocado really did as a data science problem. And I think one of the really interesting things there was framing the problem correctly as a machine learning problem, and then, you know, knowing which problems could really be helped or be benefited with an AI. And then at Facebook, there was a few problems. The most notable one was, I think, the one I was talking about with the catalog team of quality. I think the thing I found really interesting there was that actually getting the training data was incredibly hard. Especially one of the things we were trying to do was find which products were the same, but it's very hard to get the kind of false positives or like the actual matches there, because actually 1 in a million products is the same. How do you find those pairs is a really interesting challenge. And so that was a really big one. And then also, like, how do you get training data on what quality is? And can you even agree what quality is? So things I learned, I guess, from that was that really thinking about your problem and thinking about how you get training data, and if you're getting, using kind of paying people to like label stuff, how do you actually give that training, get consistent results? And so those were kind of the two. And my question I have in my mind is that, are those still the big questions we want to be asking for something like ChatGPT? Or actually, do they make those questions irrelevant? I suspect they don't, but actually right now it feels like you can just go for it. But actually, you want to especially train them on your domain or those extra things is going to be really important of thinking about that.
That's how you advance the skills. I mean, the automation is actually can hit a positive side of your industry, because you can advance your algorithm, or do more sophisticated work and generate a more higher value of the output. Yeah. So do we have any more questions on the floor remotely?
No.
If not, can we give applause to Lydia? And your advice to all of us.
Wow, wasn't that interesting? Thank you very much, Lydia, and thank you very much, Kitty, for that great session. A whole lot of practical advice and tips there from Lydia, as well as her Q&A. And it struck me that something that's essential for this field is logic. And you've got to have a logical mind and be able to apply it. So that, I would say, is actually a fundamental, as you implied. But there are loads more questions, and you could see that we were starting to go off along our, by now, usual lines of, okay, AI, how does it incorporate AI? ChatGPT, how do you use ChatGPT and so on? We've had and we're going to have lots more events on AI, because AI isn't just AI anymore, is it? There are about 20 different varieties. We're going to spill off into those. But I'd like to ask you in the audience here 2 questions. One is that we try to give 5-star events. So please give a rating, 1 star up to 5 star. No stars, please. 1 star up to 5 star of this event. What do you think of it? And then I have a second question. What data-related events would you like to see? And I've deliberately left out the analytics because it might not be about analytics. It might be about data storage or contingencies using data or all sorts of things like that. What data events would you like to see? So that's the second thing. I think you've already put down as far as why you're here. So we will look forward to seeing your answers. And we have an initiative in our groups where we look at those answers. And I've got somebody new just to introduce you to finish off with. Shabna, would you like to come up here? Yeah. So we have this data. We have lots of things on data. I'm sorry. We have this event success initiative. And part of what you're doing is that and registering people and so on. And Shabna is a new joiner to our committee. And she joins us in the event success initiative. So thank you very much for doing that. Shabna and Jay will be collecting your cards as you go out. Please do let us have your results. You matter to us. Give us your information. And then something else that I noticed Lydia had put in. She didn't call it STEM, but STEAM, and included arts in the middle of that. So I will park that for now in view of time, but feel free to ask her about the STEAM initiative as well as the data works initiatives and so on, the DataKind initiatives. Whilst you address yourselves to the artistically arranged food and drink outside. So thank you very much for being